Keep pushing that boulder to the top of the hill. Welcome one and all to Suckville.
Extraordinary stories from ordinary humans? Yes, please. This is Live from Suckville, and I'm your host, Silva Florence, a writer, editor, and bike tour leader currently laid up in Suckville with a broken hip. What does bravery mean to you? Does it mean someone who is without fear? Or is it someone who knows their fears, but goes forth anyways? For me, it's the latter. And this could mean many things. It could mean being Amelia Earhart. It could mean being Martin Luther King. It could mean being someone like my friend, Tiffany Glenn, who is not only a brave woman because of what has occurred in her life, but because of her willingness to come on this podcast and unpack it for us. Just a warning that this episode does contain references to rape and sexual violence, if you are a person who is triggered by these sorts of things, but it's well worth listening to, I promise you. And not only because it's an example of bravery, but because it gives us hope, as always, that the bad things in our lives that happen to us actually happen for us. All right, hello everybody from Suckville. How are you today? Today I'm here with Tiffany Glenn. She's a collage artist, writer, and occasional barista from Colorado who currently resides in Ireland. How are you doing today, Tiffany?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's a lovely gray morning here in Ireland, which is pretty typical.
Well, I suppose if there was sun, something would be wrong.
The sunny days here are just, it's like walking down like Sesame Street. Everyone says hello. Gray days, not so much.
So today we're here because we are live from Suckvilling, and it's a podcast about creating community through sharing our experiences with each other. And what do you think, Tiffany? Is life all sunshine and roses?
I think if it was all sunshine and roses, then something would be wrong. Because how would you know? I don't know what I am or who I am until I'm talking to you. And I don't know if it's much different in the rest of life where opposites or other things help to hone and define what things are.
And is there something that you would say has honed or defined who you are? Something in particular?
For sure.
So tell me your story, Tiffany. What happened to you?
Okay. I would say that, growing up in the States, like it's a lovely thing. I was raised in a rather religious household, strict, controlling, authoritarian, and also very loving, but just very much in that way of very much about the power of dominance or domination. And I think that really left me open to a lot of men that would be very similar to that, but in a much more like intimate context. So I've experienced a lot of sexual violence and rape. And that I think has been one of the key defining features of my life. At that time, being really young and inexperienced, being in the military, doing I was really engaging with a lot of, even without really knowing it, like a lot of institutions based on power and a lot of ideas based on power and where I stood in all of that. And also at a time where women, even though we'd been through a lot of iterations of feminism and progress, women, I feel like in that time growing up, were really intensely objectified. So I think a lot of that also, of course, seeped into like the consciousness of young women at that time.
Can I ask you what year was this when this all happened? To give us some context.
God, okay, so 2002, 2001, 2002. There were a lot of incidents, but
I'm really sorry
somewhere,
that you had to go through this.
that's, I think, thank you. It's a strange thing that it's just now become part of my life. For years, I would say the bones of 2 decades, it was really something that I pushed out and avoided. But the more I allow it to be a reality, the less seemingly it controls me
That's a
in a
really good
weird
point.
way. Like, in a sense, I'm not identified as those experiences only. And identity is tricky. There's a lot of push these days, perhaps as a result of so many young women and young people being vulnerable, like throughout. And now people are saying, enough is enough, and now we have trigger warnings and cancel culture and people who are almost championing victimhood as an identity. And I think that I can understand the feeling in that and the heart in that and the belief that that might be doing something good. But in my experience and in my observation, maintaining one's identity as a victim really separates one from one's own power and agency.
And how do you think it separates somebody from their power when they're being a victim?
From my experience, and I guess that's one of the only things I can really speak from, so having so often been in the position where no is just not really listened to or respected, it ends up being almost a foregone conclusion. I got to the point where I was telling anecdotes about incidents of rape that I didn't even call rape because they weren't as bad as other things I'd experienced. I just called them really rude behavior. And then people would just be like horrified and be like, holy shit, that person raped you. And I'd be like, no, they were just being really rude and inconsiderate, and to the point where it almost became like my power was just a foregone, like just give it over because it's not going to be mine anyway. And I think that also, not only in those situations of sexual, like
Yeah.
intimacy, but I think also in day-to-day situations where I might want something or have a certain idea about something or have a direction I want something to go in, but someone else says something else. And instead of trying to have a conversation and get to a middle ground, I just relinquish any sort of power in the situation and get really upset, because I feel like my power is being ignored. But I didn't even try to put it out there. I just gave it over, and that is something that you can write as something other people are doing to you because other people have done it to you. But most people aren't trying to take your power away. We see the world as we are. As Anais Nin, probably quoting someone else as well, but we see through a field of assumptions and experiences that are not
Pain.
Yeah, pain, exactly. That if we don't even acknowledge that there could be something in our way, we believe we're seeing the world as it is. And we're not seeing how much of it is us
Yeah.
that we're seeing that we won't deal with.
So how do we find the kind of common ground that we need to start healing all of this on a deeper level?
I think some of it has to be through the dialogue, coming back together into spaces with people that we don't agree with.
And being
And I
okay
think,
with hearing things from people we don't agree from, too. Like
yes,
being okay with the fact
yes,
that, like, I don't agree with you, but we don't have to cut each other out of our lives or stop, interacting ever again.
exactly. I think that's been one of the really detrimental things that has occurred, not just on the left, but in my experience on the left, in the ideological left, the sort of liberal kind of, is that there's this idea that if someone in your family doesn't see eye to eye with you on issues that are deeply important to you, then you just cut them out because they're horrible people. That isn't true. And that's a very childish way to go through life, saying that life is only the way I think it is. And if you don't think the way I do, then fuck you, you're out.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like a very ungenerous and unloving way to go about things.
Right. But maybe that's just the human element of any belief system, is that like there's this, and maybe it's fear as well. People, we were talking just earlier about pain and fear is definitely, I think, linked into pain. We are afraid of pain. We don't like pain. But I think pain is really necessary for us. I mean, you hear it in the gym all the time. No pain, no gain. Yes and no. But like,
Actually, that's true.
I think in some sense it's true. Like there's a grain of truth in that saying,
I mean, I think you're on to something here, really, is like, as somebody who, like all of us, has experienced some deep pain in your life, like what kind of importance does pain hold to you?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think for
And we're obviously not talking about like that we should be seeking pain.
No,
we should
right.
go out looking for pain, because pain comes to us anyway. Thank you, life.
Pain, like one of my favorite lines of The Princess Bride, didn't believe it enough as a child, definitely do now. Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something.
Yeah, I didn't really understand that until I turned like 30.
Yeah, ooh. Yeah, I was like, oh, Wesley, dark man of my dreams. Love you. Such
Wesley, now I understand you.
Yeah. Gosh.
I want to be 29 again.
Exactly. Oh, pain for me, like I still avoid it a lot. I'm still an avoidant person. I wouldn't say that just because I've learned a lot from it that I've somehow come to this very zen place with total acceptance of it. I think that'll be a lifelong kind of struggle. But I do know that pain's very important to me, because I think that some of the most definitive growth of my life has been as a result of pain. I I definitely am of the mind that the people who caused me harm are in a worse position than I am. That they are people that we deem as monstrous and therefore unworthy of our help.
But again, that's another really polarized way of seeing things, I suppose. Like we were talking before about victim, victimizer, Democrat, Republican, powerful, powerless, right?
No one comes out perfectly fucking just brand new out of the womb and just is ready to fucking like harm people left and right. Generally speaking, hurt people, right? That's the, cutesy phrase, but it doesn't make it less true.
Wow. Yeah, that's spot on. And you, as a hurt person, you said that some of your most profound learning came from pain. And so it sounds like you've been able to see your painful experiences as less destructive and more constructive. Can you tell me what you've learned from them?
So I don't think I would have had the same insight into people that would be considered perpetrators of violence, or like sort of pariahs and people to lock up and put in a box, or the same ideas about even our prison system and things like that, how we are not here to rehabilitate people, we are here to punish them, and the punitive nature of our justice system, and how justice more and more appears to me like revenge. I would not have come to those thoughts, I don't think, in the same way if I hadn't been on the receiving end of those experiences, which, while painful and often a bit horrifying, were deeply instructive and also brought me into a really close proximity with, like, as the only way I can describe it is like the surface of things.
Interesting. Okay, so what do you mean by that, the surface of things?
Like it really broke me open and opened me up. And then afterwards I went through intense periods of being overly closed as a reactive response, and and avoiding a lot of work and healing because I didn't want to face these things, but they just kept coming up. And what I realize now is that if I hadn't, there's no real way to go back. But if I hadn't avoided these things for so long, I might have come to these insights a bit sooner. But instead, I was spent so much time trying to push it away and spend a lot of time in self-loathing and a lot of time punishing myself, when just even allowing it to be what it is would have been better.
Well, hindsight is 2020, right? And I think we live in a culture that kind of encourages us to look perfect, to seem perfect, even when everything is completely going to shit, you know?
Yeah, I think I don't know, I think sometimes I feel that the culture encourages this, this sort of maybe the perfectionist ideal and this deep identification of self as physical, like as just the body. We're supposed to put everything into how we appear. These are little traps and things that you can get really stuck in. A lot of people I've talked to are very angry at the idea that our culture could be this way and so shallow, and so having us chase what are considered maybe quote the wrong things. And I don't know, maybe it's good to have something to work against.
How do you mean by that exactly?
Because if I don't want to be like that culture, then I know something about myself, that maybe these things aren't as valuable to me as this sort of big entity that's all really slippery and kind of always a little bit
Yeah,
changey
sure.
and hard to grasp and hard to like pin down, is telling me to be. I don't think taking out the bad things would ever actually produce something good, like something truly good. I think if you have only good, what do you know? And what do you like? Is there anything that's truly good for everyone? I don't know if utopia exists.
Well, it certainly doesn't now, because
Right.
in utopia there would be no pain, and that the reality of life is just that there's a lot of pain. So, you know, but it's an
What happens
important
if
thing.
we,
That's the thing that we
yeah, what happens
miss.
if we welcome them? Welcome the pain.
Instead of pushing it
Welcome the
away.
pain. Not like, yeah, no, I'm not saying chase the
Unless
pain
you're
and be
like
like,
into
yeah,
S&M, then go chase the pain.
yeah, fine. Chase the
But
pain. Chase the pain. It's a door that'll lead you somewhere,
yeah,
and that's
that's a really, I like how you said that it's a door that can lead you somewhere. And it's a door a lot of people I think would rather leave closed, because then you don't have to do any hard work and looking in the shadowy corners.
I think, yeah, our desire to be seen as good or to see ourselves as good when we feel like we're not, and then our desire to project this sort of uber good, virtuous person to the world so that we can get love, because that's what we all want. I think our desire to be seen as good really gets in the way of us actually being it. I think that there's a lot of, the common term for it is virtue signaling. We do that, I think, in order to feel like we are good, to be seen as good, and to be connected to people we believe are good. If we could give ourselves a bit more grace, maybe we'd give the people around us a bit more grace and have a little bit more generosity in how we see them, instead of expecting them to do what we want them to do because we want them
Absolutely.
to do it. It's such an intensely egotistical way to do things, but that's what we do. That's what we're taught to do, in a sense, is, because we're right. Rightness as well. Jesus.
Yeah.
How tedious being right.
How did we get to the point where we all have to be right? Like, what is so important about being right all the time? That's what I'm not so. I don't feel the need to be right. Maybe because I don't know shit.
I would say that the more I know, the less I know. Chris, my husband, is very good at teaching me that lesson of not needing to be right. I haven't, I'm a smug asshole. Like, I'd love to be right. Like, but I know that I think a lot of that comes from, that's a way to get power, for one. But I also think what's interesting about needing to be right all the time is if you're right all the time, what have you to learn? What, like, if you know everything, then there's nothing left for you to learn. How boring. But like, we're afraid to be wrong because wrong looks weak. I think wrong is associated with like, stupidity or weakness or not knowing, like as if we're supposed to know everything. How could you know?
And it's
without
okay
learning.
not to know, too.
Exactly.
It's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah. And
But it's really hard for people to say, I don't know.
so hard.
Me
And
too.
yeah,
You know?
but I think that's, again, kind of like asking for help,
Mm-hmm.
also really difficult because we want to be self-sufficient. We want to take care of ourselves. We don't want to be a burden on other people,
I
like,
can suffer on my own.
yeah. Why do I need you to suffer? I don't. Look at me and my martyrdom. I will martyr myself into my own suffering.
That sounds awful. Why do we do this to ourselves?
What are we trying to prove, and who are we trying to prove it to? But yeah, I see it all the time. And I see more and more this sort of like, you have to choose camps, you have to choose sides. And is it good to put people in those boxes? Is it good to reduce people to your idea of them? Do you actually ever see them then? Or do you just see the idea that
Those
you
are some
have?
good questions to ponder.
Well, it's easy to reduce people to a category, but that's, one of the things that I've learned about, through my own experiences is, people are so upset at people committing violence on each other because violence is dehumanizing and objectifying, reducing someone to something not human and basically an object for use or abuse. But what else do we do?
What do you mean? Like when we label people?
When we say, you are this, like the common refrain, is that all of your relatives now are racist, bigots, and things like that. But how fucking arrogant is it to say, I know everything about you. I am reducing you to this name.
I think because it's easier to reduce somebody to a hateful bigot than it is to realize that they're a whole complex bunch of things that don't make sense, that are opposing.
Yeah.
Our brains are like, what? Like we can't get over that.
All these things repeat because we can't ever truly learn from them. It's all these new generations of people going through the same shit that other people went through and being like, oh, look, they did that. We're going to do it again. We just...
It's like on a larger scale of what happens in our lives. Like we will have the same often painful experiences again and again if we kind of fail to learn what we're supposed to learn.
Yeah.
I think
that we are drawn to situations and people who have something to teach us until we're ready to learn. A lot of people talk about the cycle of violence or cycle of abuse when it comes to domestic violence, sexual violence, etc. And I see it cyclically as well, but at the same time, like, if we want to make that dichotomy of villain and victim and say this one deserves punishment and this one deserves healing, it's to say that the perpetrator is the only person participating, like in a sort of hunterly way, like almost a predatory way. And I'm not saying there isn't predatory behavior, especially when it comes to youth. But I'm going to say that I think I was drawn to a lot of those people because they had certain traits that I had grown up around, as seeing that this is how men are, this is how men should be, and I'm not saying that every person who's like a dominant, like sort of stereotypical dude is a rapist at all.
sure. No,
But
definitely not.
I found myself drawn to people who had that sort of darkness. And I think in a way, my absolute sheltered naivete was like, how do you say, a perfect storm.
Yeah.
Because I looked like an easy fucking meal, man. Super trusting. So I think in certain ways, keeping it like the villain and the victim, I'm not saying that the victim is at fault for what happens to them. I want to say these things should never happen to you, shouldn't have happened to you. These things are horrifying. And on some level,
They are.
For sure.
And that's a fact, but I
think there's a relationship here. Trap and trapped are one.
because like it or not, we are all connected by this whole system in which we're living, which is flawed. and full of pain.
Yeah, and I wonder if it wouldn't be better in a way to try to heal both parties as opposed to just the one that got hurt in that instance. I don't know if we're ever going to stop it from happening if we don't heal the people who are causing harm. That's a really tall order when you look at the world. I mean, look at what's happening right now. I mean, in Europe, we have the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You've got a lot of people
Which is
fleeing.
horrific.
So many people are fighting for their country. There's a war on Europe's doorstep. And all of these situations are producing people who are hurt by them. And then how do those hurts, how do those giant pains go out into the small, like diffuse into the small lives of the people who experience not only the pain of loss, but the pain of violence?
That is actually a really good question. Do you have any ideas about how we could solve this dilemma?
I think if we weren't so desperate to classify people as monsters or, innocents, then we would be able to see more of how, on a bigger level, these things are affecting us as a social body. And maybe we would see more of how we should stop things at a bigger level.
But I think most things start with us, and with us being more conscious of the way that we see other people, other cultures, our neighbors, etc. What do you think?
I noticed it myself yesterday. I was going through something on Instagram, and there was a bunch of Russian collage artists that I was seeing. And I was going, like, for a moment, my brain was like, do I want to like that? I was like, this person has nothing to do with that. Of course, their art is good. Like, stop trying to put people in these boxes that says, oh, you're one of those. I think that the more maybe difficult thing is to just try to see people as just not all the things that we want to call them to separate them from ourselves. Language is beautiful in that it gives us the opportunity to do what we're doing right now. Language is difficult in that it's also really seemingly determined to reduce things to smaller and smaller labels, which are divisions and separations.
I love that you brought this up about language, because I think a lot of us don't realize how powerful the words that we use are, in a negative or positive sense. It depends.
Exactly, but it's our one, well, not our one tool, but it's one of our main tools for trying to bridge the divide. But it also naturally has those little divisions. There's a really great book that I would recommend to anyone listening to this, which is called On Dialogue by David Bohm. He's a physicist who wrote about dialogue later in his life after doing these giant experiments with dialogue groups, and how he realized that even in like the 80s and 90s that social fabric was breaking down, and that he believed that the thing that would heal it was having people get together in big groups and talking. No leader, no subject, just talking on a regular basis. And that eventually you'd get to a point where underneath all of the conflict at the surface, you'd get to a deeper truth together.
Yeah, it's like we were talking about earlier, with dialogue being kind of the only way to reconnect people. And in a large part, that's what I hope that this podcast accomplishes, with a series of long dialogues with different kinds of people, trying to find the things that we all share in common, because isn't it better to share than to be all alone?
Absolutely preferable to, the isolating tricks of maligned ego, just hiding in its tower of pain that it doesn't want to feel.
And has lost the key and can't get down because it doesn't want to ask for help.
Poor little bastard. I know.
And it's thirsty.
And
it probably wants a pizza.
It defo wants a pizza. If it's in Italy, it defo wants a pizza. Those pizzas are fucking life.
So wants a pizza.
I want a pizza. I want one of those.
Or maybe
pizzas.
it's your
No,
host and guests that want pizzas, I think.
Oh, sounds so nice. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. So that's a little bit of a divergence there, but
I mean, you can't always talk about painful stuff, right? Because you have to also talk about the joys.
Yeah, there are so many joys. I think that's one of the things that pain also opens you up to. And I have a handy book to reference, which is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran.
This is one of my favorite
Let
books
me
of all
just-
time.
Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the selfsame well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain.
Do you think that
So
that's
beautiful.
true in your life too?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that now, full disclosure, I've been reading this book on and off for about the past 2 decades and encountered it after an intense experience of rape. Like that was like one of the things that was a point of solace. So, in the way that other people might turn to Jesus, I would say that on some level, this has just been one of those companionate texts that gave me a framework to make sense of my experiences in a way that wasn't about hating someone else. You know, that's one thing that I don't think I've ever really been interested in out of those experiences was hating people.
That's really powerful, I think, because I think it's really easy to hate other people.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's a lot easier than, like, I mean, obviously, this was not something that you deserved. That's another interesting word, but
Yeah.
this wasn't something that, anyone should have to go through. But it's a lot easier to hate the person who did it than to have to look at what happened and try to integrate it into the person that you now are.
It struck me now that I don't necessarily love those people either, and that's maybe something I could work on. Like I feel kind of a neutrality towards them. Like I feel a pity for them, but I don't know if that's actually good. But also, one thing that I would say is that the most integrative time in my life has been since I left America, since I really stopped working full time because I received compensation for PTSD from the VA, which allows me to work part time or less. And that time that has given me has been one of the most incredible things for really sitting with myself. And to let some of this is also probably about age and the distance from these experiences, like, wow, 2002 in December, that'll be 20 years. And maybe that's part of it as well. Time soothes things. Edges become softer, the things you take out and look at, whether or not they horrify you, I think tend to horrify you less because they're just familiar at this point, and you're no longer in that room or those rooms. You're no longer a body trapped under another body. You're no longer that, like all of your your cells have regenerated. Everything is like physically is changed. It's the memory that holds you to it. But I think even then, at some point, that just became too heavy to carry.
Wow. Thank you for being vulnerable and being willing to share your story. It's really powerful when somebody is willing to do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me as your guest. I really appreciate it.
Please do send me your stories or comments for a future episode at livefromsuckville@gmail.com. Want to be the mayor of Suckville for the week and get to shout out someone or share some advice? Find out more on Live from Suckville's Instagram and Facebook pages. Special thanks to Chris Kirby for the awesome theme music. This episode was recorded in my kitchen and produced by yours truly. Until next time.